Have you ever just looked around and had this weird feeling that maybe things aren't quite what they seem? Well, today we are jumping straight into the deep end with a question that's gone from late-night dorm room chats to serious debates among scientists and philosophers.
I mean, just let that sink in for a second. This isn't just some cool line from a sci-fi movie anymore. This is a real question that gets at the very heart of, well, everything we think we know about reality. So let's get right to it. Is our entire universe, everything we see, touch, and feel, just an unbelievably sophisticated computer program? And are we just characters in someone else's cosmic game? Let's unpack the arguments and see how plausible this wild idea really is. Now, before we start talking about post-human civilizations and quantum computers, we actually need to rewind the clock. Way back. Because believe it or not, this question is not new. Its DNA goes back over 2,000 years to ancient Greece. So the philosopher Plato told this story, right? He asks us to picture some people living deep inside a cave, and they've been there their whole lives, chained up, facing a flat wall. Behind them, there's a fire, and between them and the fire, puppeteers are holding up objects, casting shadows on the wall that the prisoners are forced to look at. And here's the crucial part. For these prisoners, those shadows aren't just shadows. They are reality. It's all they've ever seen, all they've ever known. They have absolutely no idea about the real objects, the puppeteers, or even the fire behind them. This flickering show on the wall is their entire universe. And as Socrates puts it in Plato's dialogue, it's totally logical, right? The prisoners would think that truth is nothing but the shadows. They mistake the illusion for the real thing, because their whole perception of the world is limited. They literally don't know what they don't know.
So you get this incredible contrast, You have the cave reality, this world of darkness, echoes, and secondhand information. And then you have the world outside, the real world, full of sunlight, direct knowledge, real objects. And that whole journey from the dark into the light, for Plato, that's what learning, what enlightenment is all about.
Okay, so how on earth does a 2,400-year-old story about a cave have anything to do with our high-tech world? Well, it turns out Plato's allegory has gotten a major reboot for the digital age.
Just think about it. In this new version, the cave isn't made of rock, it's a digital reality. The shadows on the wall aren't cast by a fire, they're rendered by lines of code. And the fundamental laws of our universe, the speed of light, gravity, quantum mechanics, what if those are just the processing rules of the giant computer we're all living in?
Now, this idea was really put on the map by the philosopher Nick Bostrom. He proposed that any civilization that gets advanced enough, what he calls post-human, would probably have such insane amounts of computing power that they could run perfect, high-fidelity simulations of their ancestors. And who are their ancestors? Well, that's us. And that's where the pure math of it all gets really, really weird. If these future civilizations run not just one, but thousands or millions of these ancestor simulations, then the number of simulated people would absolutely dwarf the number of original biological people. So just based on probability, what are the odds that we happen to be in the one single original reality? They suddenly become very, very small. But this is way more than just a numbers game or a cool what-if scenario. Bostrom built this really tight logical argument around the whole thing. He turned it into a formal thought experiment that has some pretty heavy implications.
Okay, so for this argument to even get off the ground, you have to accept one key idea. It's called substrate independence. It's basically the theory that consciousness, your awareness, isn't magical. It's a product of information processing. So it doesn't really matter if that processing happens on biological carbon-based neurons in your brain or on silicon-based transistors in a computer. If the structure is complex enough, consciousness can emerge.
And just to give you a sense of the kind of computing power we're talking about, it's just mind-boggling. Physicists have estimated that a single computer the size of a planet could, in theory, perform 10 to the 42nd power calculations per second. That's a 1 with 42 zeros after it. Our brains can't even comprehend a number that huge.
So the whole argument really stands on these three legs. First, you assume that future civilizations will get this kind of insane computing power. Second, you assume they could use it to run tons of simulations of their past. And third, you assume that the beings inside those simulations would be conscious, just as conscious as we feel right now. If you grant those three things, the conclusion is pretty hard to escape.
And this is where it gets really interesting. Bostrom's logic doesn't actually say, we are definitely in a simulation. Nope.
Instead, it forces us into what he calls a trilemma. It means that if his initial assumptions are correct, then one and only one of three very specific and honestly very strange propositions has to be true.
All right, possibility number one is not a cheerful one. It's that species like us almost never make it. We go extinct before we ever reach that post-human stage with godlike computing power. We get wiped out by war, or climate change, or an asteroid, you name it. The Great Filter gets us in the end.
Possibility number two is that advanced civilizations do survive, and they could run these simulations, but they just don't want to. Maybe they find it unethical. Maybe they find it incredibly boring, or maybe there's some kind of cosmic law against it. But for this to be true, basically every single advanced civilization forever has to decide against it. Not one of them gets curious.
And that brings us to the third door. If we don't go extinct, and if any of our future descendants decide to run even a handful of these ancestor simulations, then the number of simulated minds will eventually become astronomically larger than the number of real ones. Which means statistically, we are almost certainly one of them.
So, there you have it. That's the choice. Extinction, universal disinterest, or simulation. According to the logic of the argument, one of these has to be our reality. And if you ask a lot of people who think about this stuff, they'll tell you that if you're being objective, number 3 might just be the most likely one on the list. Okay, let's take a breath. And let's get to the big so what question. I mean, let's just assume for a minute that this is all true. We are in a simulation. What changes? Does that mean our lives are a lie? Does anything actually matter anymore?
I think that's the gut reaction, right? To feel like if this isn't base reality, then everything is fake. Our struggles, our accomplishments, our love for our families, it's all just code. It feels like it cheapens the whole human experience.
But here's the thing, and maybe this is the most important takeaway. It doesn't matter if our reality is running on atoms in a universe or on code in a computer. Our experience of that reality is still 100% real to us. Hunger feels real. Fear feels real. Love absolutely feels real. The choices you make have real consequences for the other people who share this reality with you. This world is as real as we experience it.
And so that's the thought I want to leave you with. Maybe this whole question isn't really about physics or computers. Maybe it's about perspective. If you suddenly learned that you were living inside an incredibly complex, beautiful, and maybe even meaningful game, would that make you want to just give up? Or would it make you want to play it with more curiosity, more passion, and more purpose than ever before?